This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, welcome everyone to an Ashford University Forbes School of Business and Technology SHRM Chapter webinar. My name is Dr. Katie Theory, Program Chair for the Bachelor of Arts and Masters in Human Resource Management degree program, and one of the faculty advisors for this virtual chapter of the Society for Human Resource Management, which is sponsored and supported by the BA and MHRM degree programs. Our chapter offers free membership to Ashford University alumni, current students, and faculty from all degree programs. And as we get started with today's session first, we need to ensure that you know, by participating in this recorded webinar, all real-time comments and questions, both typed and audio, will become part of the chapter archive. So please take a moment to read the notice on your screen before we continue. The recording of this session will be published to the chapter's YouTube channel, linked on our website, www.fsbt.shrmchapter.org, and we'll also share the link at the end of today's presentation. We'll have all of our participants at the start of our session remain on mute, and we'll open up the audio for the Q&A portion. If you have a question or comment, just as you are now, please use the chat pod and continue doing that throughout the session. On behalf of the SHRM Chapter's leadership team, welcome to today's webinar titled Change Management. How's that working for you? Presented by guest speaker, Dr. MeLisa Rogers, HR consultant and career coach. Before I formally introduce and turn the mic over to our speaker, I'd first like to thank our current SHRM Chapter leadership team, which consists of student officers and faculty advisors, some of whom are present in today's session. You'll see them in the chat area here. Kayla O'Leary, Narcissa Turner, and Chris Clement. And of course, a shout out to our former student leadership who remain connected and supportive of chapter activities as alum advisors. I see Mike McEwen. Shout out to Tanisha Neal and Jerry Wilson as well. I mention these names because the activities of this chapter are a result of significant teamwork by these individuals who you have already seen as webinar co-hosts, presenters, and LinkedIn discussion facilitators. And when they are not front and center, they're doing all of the work behind the scenes. Case in point, thank you, Dr. Catherine Frost, here today, Associate Faculty and Faculty Advisor to the chapter, and Leah Westerman, JD, Core Faculty and Faculty Advisor also to the chapter. This group is committed to events like this, which promote the exchange of work-related experience between HR professionals, students, and faculty members, and to provide industry knowledge and career support to students outside of the classroom. So now that I've made introductions, I invite all of you, our live participants, to use the chat feature. Continue doing that to introduce yourselves. I recognize some familiar names as current students and faculty, so please let us know your degree program affiliation and your relationship with the Forbes School of Business and Technology. And welcome guests from Hess Corporation and our Zovio partners. We're pleased that you've all joined us for this hour and hope you enjoy today's presentation. I have the pleasure now of providing the welcome and introduction to our guest presenter, Dr. MeLisa Rogers, who will be leading today's session on the slides to follow. Please allow me to acquaint you with Dr. Rogers, HR consultant, career coach, HR business instructor. Our paths crossed about 10 years ago as we both completed our doctorates in training and performance improvement at Capella University. And it's wonderful to be reconnected to her to learn more about her more than 20 years of experience in organizational development and human resources in Fortune 500 organizations. Her industry certifications include SHRM SCP, Professional Behavioral Analyst, DISC Communications Consultant, and Certified Professional Resume Writer with the Professional Association of Resume Writers and Career Coaches. Dr. Rogers is published in several editions of the Career Planning and Adult Development Journal In addition to a PhD in trading and performance improvement, her academic background includes an MS from Pittsburgh State University and a BS from Texas A&M. Additionally, she is a founder and charter member of South Texas SHRM, a former regional director for the Texas State Council of SHRM. She has served on the Diversity Committee for Kansas State SHRM, is the past president of the SEKC SHRM chapter. Okay, you get the point. She's heavily involved in HR education. I wouldn't have time left if I disclosed her entire bio. So allow me to turn the mic over. Welcome, Dr. MeLisa Rogers.
Thank you, Katie. Dr. Terry, I really appreciate it. And it's just a pleasure to be here today to talk to the SHRM chapter. And what an honor it is to see the outpouring of support that y'all have for your chapter. Today we're going to talk a little bit about, just really start a conversation about change management. And I think that we've all been through change in our organizations and in different parts of our lives as we go through our careers and just continue to pursue excellence. To steal the line, I want to say, how's that working for you? So let's just move on, and I'll have some questions along the way. Feel free to answer those questions in the chat box, and then at the end of the discussion today, we'll open the mics up for comments and additional questions. So today I'd like to discuss really some impact of change models and identify some change interventions, as well as assess some organizational development tactics and tools to improve performance in the workplace as we take a look at change. One thing I'd like to say is, I have conversations with, as Dr. Theory was saying, I'm pretty involved with SHRM. I do a lot of traveling around the southern Midwest to various conferences, Texas, Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas. And, I really just like to converse with HR professionals, business professionals, and just really kind of find out what's going on and what's their pain. And if they could do one thing differently, what would that do? And so many times this is what comes up more often than not. Really, it's two things. It's change and then it's communication. So change just happens to be something that I grasped onto. I'm doing a little research on that and really starting to get some additional data to build on. So I guess my first question is, when we don't change, what happens? Feel free to answer that in the chat box. When we don't change, we what?
And MeLisa, the comments that I'm seeing from Jim, we become dinosaurs. Samantha says we can't grow. Maria, we do not grow. Very overall consensus, we don't grow. We stop growing. Same as if we stop learning. Mike says we get left behind.
Love it. I love the dinosaurs. I love the fact that we don't grow, we get left behind. Because you know what? I think that if you recognize some of these, I think we would agree that some of these we don't see anymore. Some of these have gone away. Some of these businesses are struggling. Of course, there's still some that are trying to reinvent themselves, right? Don't know if you have a favorite, but I can remember my first BlackBerry phone. I don't see them anymore. Polaroid is making a comeback with, I think, the mini pictures. Some of you may not even know what that looks like, but certainly we need to understand, why did this happen? Why do these once very prominent types of businesses and industries no longer seem to be as prominent as they once were? So that's what, we're going to talk a little bit about that. And so let me ask you this now. What does 3 to 4 mean? And I'll give you a hint. This is not the number of Masters tournaments that Tiger Woods has won. If you watched the tournament in Augusta, Georgia last weekend, you'll know that he was the winner, but this does not have to do with how many Masters he's won. So does anybody have an idea of what this 3 to 4 means? You can guess. It pertains to change.
Mike proposes the number of major changes in our lives.
In your life, okay. That's close. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, 3 to 4 changes used to be what we would go through probably when I first started my career in operations. We would go 3 to 4 changes a year. And I don't know that it's a long time ago, about 30 years ago. But, you know, you vice president would come down with the change, or the operations manager. You analyze it, look at it, make the change, everybody's happy. However, that is usually not the number that we're dealing with today. Usually the number that we're dealing with today is much more than that, or it's ongoing, right? I mean, we never just deal with 3 to 4 changes in our organizations. And usually when I'm presenting to large audiences and I ask, you know, how many people are going through change, most hands go up in the room. And I would venture to say that's probably the case with you all today. So that's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about the particular changes that you're going through in your organization. Okay, here's another one. What does 70% mean?
Jim proposes 70% is the number of initiatives that fail. Is that right, Jim? Cheryl says on-the-job training. Sharon says the number of people that are opposed to changing.
Great feedback. And Jim, you're the winner for this round, and it was maybe part of the description, so good for you. But yes, isn't this a huge number of changes that fail? And let's just think about the resources, the time, and the energy that we put forth in designing and developing change initiatives, only for them not to succeed. We need to change that number, don't we? No one wants to have this number of failure. We want to reverse that. We want this to be 70% of success. But there's definitely statistics out there that show that 70% of change initiatives do in fact fail. So let's talk about what can we do about this. You know, part of my survey is that I've been sending out, and here's a couple of questions. So in my organization, and you can kind of think along with this, communication is good, proactively identify future changes and opportunities. And in answer to this, there was more than 80% of participants that agreed. Well, that's great. You know, everybody's communicating. This is looking good. But another question came up, and I happened to select these two because I thought that this was interesting. Employees in my organization willingly accept change. So my thought process was that if communication is good, and there's more than 80% agree that communication is good, then surely that would result in willingly accepting change. Well, that wasn't the case. Less than 40% said that they they did not willingly accept change. So, you know, these are a couple of numbers that we need to look at, or that I wanted to look at, and I want to explore further as I continue on my survey to see, you know, how can we get these numbers to come closer together. So, proven change models. Now, we've all heard of the change models, and I guess my next question will be, why do we not use them? We know that we have 70% of change that fails. So why do these particular models that we know that's been out there for a long time, ADCAR, Lewin's, you know, the other ones that are out there, fairly popular change models. So I'd just like to pose the question again, or to you, another question, you know, why do you feel like change models fail? Do you use them or do you not use them?
MeLisa, so far, Carol Williams shares people like to stick to what works. Nina says because we don't stick with the change process long enough. Soriel says people are stuck in their ways. Sorry, there's so many great comments coming through. I don't mean to leave anyone out.
That's okay. That's good, and I think that we're on the right path there. Truly, and I think that we're all, thinking along the same lines. We want to stick with what works. Do we know what works? Have we tried these things? And quite frankly, guys, I really think that some of these are just a little bit outdated from the perspective, and there's nothing wrong with these change models, but we also have to remember that, when we were back to doing 3 to 4 change models in a year or so, these were great to look at, to come to closure on change. But now most cultures are continuous change. And so that's why we want to talk about, how can we think about and anticipate what's happening in change. And that word anticipate really came up or comes up a lot in conversations with HR professionals. And I started really looking at some models to think about, we do SWOT analysis. We like to do SWOT analysis when it comes to strategic planning and that sort of thing. And then I came across the PEST analysis. But that's what this is. And, you can Google your own version of the PEST analysis. This happens to be the one that I chose. And of course, I'm from Texas, so I had to add my Texas-sized roaches in here to just give it a little flair. But, I'd like for you to look at the corners where we see what does PEST stand for. So you'll look over here on the top left, political, below that, social, cultural, on the right-hand side, economic, and then below that, technological. So if you think about the change that your organization is experiencing right now, think about where you might categorize that change. Because as we go through the next couple of slides, we're going to kind of see, and think about where maybe some organizations could have been better and proactively looking at anticipating change. So if we really kind of look into what some of these consider as far as these categories, we see government, legislation, under political, under economic, we see certainly wage rates and economic institutions, employment rates, etc. On the bottom left, we have demographic trends, lifestyle changes, that sort of thing, and then of course technology changes. So, I'd like for you to maybe just share what are 1 or 2 changes that you can think of right now that that we might be going through that your organization may want to consider as to how could it be affected in the next few years if they don't anticipate what's happening. But pick a category. Is there something that strikes you in one of these categories is what we're going through now, perhaps as a country or as your organization, as new developments? What do you think? Do you have any ideas of what your company or what you think might be something as a predictor of change looking at this PEST analysis?
AI is the first comment that came through. Political, new production processes.
Great. Okay. Definitely artificial intelligence, from that perspective, technology, we have an aging workforce, definitely will be influenced by that. We have healthcare, will definitely be influenced by that. And while your organization might not be tied directly to that type of factor as far as anticipating change, it's something to think about on some level. So let's take a look at some behavior-based interventions. I always like to look at things from a behavior perspective because so many times, and of course, being certified in as a behavior analyst, I really see how this connects what we do in our organizations and how our culture reflects our own behaviors. So looking at this and tying this back to some OG interventions, we've got 3 categories I really want to kind of look at as far as consideration and conversation as a change model. So, preparedness, have we anticipated, researched, and identified possible changes that are coming up in those PEST factors that might affect how we would look at our organization and prepare ourselves for change? Processes, have we looked at consensus of our group? Do we have a good handle on our stakeholders, our community in our organization? Are we gathering data? Are we really trying to stay ahead of that curve so that when it comes time to really roll something out, are we getting the commitment and are we able to implement perhaps either quickly or thoroughly are really bringing that in to our organization. And then proceeding, do we have a good handle on how we're going to motivate our employees or stakeholders and those that are involved with change, so that we come to the evaluation process, we can truly get some solid data that will let us know, are we headed in the right direction? Do we need to modify change? So I really like these three areas. These seem to come up frequently. Somewhere along the way, it seems that some of this could be missing as we're looking at change. And these aren't necessarily always reflected in some of the change models that we just visited previously. So let's talk about anticipating change. And as you think about changes in your organization, what are you anticipating? We just looked at the test factors. We just talked about some things that we may have to consider anticipating. And, we looked at some organizations that didn't possibly anticipate change. So let's look at an example of this. So we have Walmart versus Amazon. The reason I like this story is I believe Amazon, I think I recently read, is somewhere around 20 years old now. Of course, Walmart's been around a long time. But the reason I like this story is I don't know about you guys, but I really didn't know that much about Amazon until, after they were in business for quite some time. But once I got the Amazon quote unquote bug, I have stuff in my Amazon cart all the time, right? Just waiting for the next paycheck so I can click off my Amazon and get my purchases, right? So, but Walmart tried to get into that online business. And while they're making some headway, I would venture to say that there's many of you that probably do not have a cart in your Walmart account. So what's the difference between Walmart and Amazon? Why are you more inclined to purchase something from Amazon, have your Amazon cart full, maybe not your Walmart cart as far as online purchases? Does anybody have any feedback for that?
Carol's mentioning Amazon Prime.
Okay.
Mike says Amazon is the future, Walmart is the past. Nina says Amazon is faster delivery.
That's right. They've got great customer service. They really started to do what? They started to anticipate what was happening with technology. So let's just say 20 years ago, what was that? 1999, something around there, if I'm, on my years right. So yeah, they started anticipating, look, we need efficiency. Walmart has the big box stores and they were doing great. They were combining, you could get your prescriptions, you could get your eyes taken care of, they had a bank. But I tell you what, when you walked into Walmart with a cart full of 4 kids, climbing everywhere, and you forgot something on the other end of the store, and then you had to walk out to this large parking lot. It was great for a while, but we needed to see things to be more convenient and more efficient as far as our customers were concerned. Amazon picked up on this. So, now Walmart is doing something now, which I'm sure y'all are aware of. I love their commercial where you do the grocery pickup. So that is certainly appealing to the convenience. But I just thought this was a great story because there was some, Warren Buffett was involved, and he, if you go in and kind of read that story about, he sold his shares and was more invested, and he sold his shares in Walmart, and that was a big deal. So definitely this is where we see, these two large organizations kind of competing against one another, but a great example of which organization anticipated change and which one may not have. So Walmart shares went down 21%, Amazon increased 119%, just to go and show you where that impact was. So researching options. So what do we do? It's important that we kind of think about looking at our options and what are we doing here to take a look at where we need to invest our time and efforts. There are a lot of options out there, and I'm sure before Amazon really started getting solely involved, they really wanted to understand more about the market. So again, before we start putting our time and effort, think about the change that you're going through, and did you research the options to ensure that this was a great direction or a good direction to put your time, money, and effort into it? Because here's the deal. I like to call this stay in your lane. And we all have, each one of our organizations has strengths that we are prone to specialize in. Now, several years ago, of course, you know, many of you may know Jack Welch and the 4-strength system that he had. And this was interesting, and I like to put this in here not to be part of a fad, because I tell you what, I've been in human resources for a long time, and I would have VPs come into my office and say, hey, MeLisa, I just got off the plane with a VP from so-and-so, and they're doing this to help employee retention. And so that's what I think we need to do. I think we need to get involved. And this actually happened. I had a vice president who said, I want you to run me a report of all of the performance of the entire workforce, and I want to start looking at, you know, laying off the bottom 10%. And I just thought, what? Where did this come from? This is the first time I've heard of it. And so he gave me the book. This is, you know, Jack Welch is working for him, and I think that, you know, this is really where we need to go. So I took the book home, and then I realized after I started reading the book and doing some research on this a little bit more, that that's not exactly how it works. What happened was Jack Welch would coach his employees. He would provide opportunities for learning and development. Yes, he created a competitive environment, but you always knew where you stood. You knew if you were in the top, if you knew where you stood in that top 10% or the bottom 10%, you knew where you were. It wasn't a guessing game. It wasn't something that, you know, here today, gone tomorrow. Some of the research said that you pretty much had about a year to exit the organization. You were given tools and encouragement. And typically, when someone left the organization, they were usually at or exceeded levels of performance when they went to other organizations. So I think researching is important. You just so maybe a little pushback. Sometimes we may have to push back to our leadership to say, exactly what will our objectives be when we go through this change? Identifying change and the types of change is important. Again, some of this comes up as far as what are we doing in our change. And I'm just going to load this slide up because we have different types of change, right? So when we think of modified, inventive, and radical, so think about the change that your organization may be going through now. Is it something that's just renewed knowledge? Let's just say maybe it's a new payroll system and it's, you know, coming along, and all we're going to do is we're going to add something to that particular payroll system, or we're going to add some new technology to what we already have. That would be, you know, pretty much an example of modified. Inventive gets a little bit more in depth. Maybe that requires a bit more resources. Maybe we're starting to look at some new concepts as far as how we're going to roll something out. We want to take this to the next level. We're going to add something maybe that we're not very familiar with. But, you know, then when it comes to radical, what might be an example of a radical change that you've seen in an organization or perhaps that your organization has experienced? Does anybody have an example they want to share? Any takers on the radical?
You've stumped everyone. Okay, here we go. They're coming in. RIPS mergers. Post-it notes, Lisa? Can you elaborate on that? Thanks, Nina. Mergers and acquisitions.
Mergers and acquisitions.
New HR policies.
Okay. Yeah, you know, and I think that some of the things that we're going through now, you know, can be pretty radical. Let's just say, for example, I mean, I would think that if I'm a human resource manager in an operation today, and I'm from, you know, I'm currently living in Missouri, and they just passed the medical marijuana law, and so I would think, wait, this is borderline radical, because, now we've got recreational marijuana, we've got medical marijuana. Now I have to change some of the processes that I'm doing when I'm hiring or looking at applicants, bringing in onboarding applicants for this. Would you agree? I mean, that would be something that may be radical for us. And so while it may not be a new discovery, it's certainly a different way that we're handling things. So that requires maybe a different set of how you're going to think about things and what you're going to implement, how you're going to roll it out, the questions that you may have. So getting some consensus for change. We have to get people on board, and resistance happens to be a large obstacle for change. Why do you think people resist change so much? What's some feedback there?
Jim adds, people are taken out of their comfort zone. Samantha says it's easier to do what you've always done. Dr. Morris adds fear. Catherine shares, Dr. Frost shares, makes them uncomfortable.
So true. We have fear, discomfort. When we allow change to occur, maybe we haven't done a great job, and I certainly have been in these situations where, we haven't maybe communicated as well as we could. And there's fear. One time we had a part, I've shared in my bio as part of a poultry industry, and that was here. One of the top 3 poultry industries, Hudson Foods, and we were expanding our operation. And in the process of the new construction, that part of the building caught on fire. Okay, well, what happened was there was a lot of smoke damage, but we did not do a very good job of communicating the fact that, hold on, we're going to get this thing squared away, and we'll be back up and running probably in about 7 days. Well, what happened is that our workforce said, we're out of here. We're not going to hang around. We need jobs. Half of our workforce left to go work for other people because they just didn't think that we were going to be up and running. Well, our organization hired an environmental agency and a recovery team, and we worked around the clock, and we hired those employees that stayed, and we were actually up and running in 7 days, which was actually pretty impressive. It was, of course, had to go through a large sanitation process and that sort of thing. So, we didn't get consensus. We didn't really communicate that as good as we could have. And that, of course, is an extreme situation, but people will start making up their own ideas of what's happening, won't they? They'll start thinking, they'll start creating their own fears if we don't communicate and get the consensus and get them on board. So involving stakeholders and getting them on board, letting them know what's going on. And, every employee may not be involved with every change, but if it affects them in some level, they want to know, then it's important for us to make sure that we're communicating that, because at the end of the day, we do need those folks that are involved with change to commit, because, it's not a lack of desire, it's really a lack of commitment. And what I like about this next slide is this is where some of the behaviors come in. And it's just what we've been talking about. At the beginning, when we start going through some changes, I'll just use that fire as an example. There was a lot of shock, confusion, what happened here, and there was a lot of assumptions being made, upon their own self as far as what was going on. Usually, if it's a large, change, there's going to be some denial. Oh my gosh, we're going to go to computers. Where's my typewriter? Just those kinds of changes. And so so looking at the behaviors and what people are really going through and thinking of creates resistance. And so really, if we start to understand the behaviors of the organization, what is our culture like? Do we really look at, and are we taking the time to understand these various stages? And these stages are different for different people. In an organization that I'm working with now, there was a lot of resistance with a particular change that we were going through. And a team member just really didn't want to make the change, didn't want to go forward. And so finally, when she got on board with the change that we began to make, then she started to understand more about where this could go. But this was the type of behavior style that needed a lot of information, a lot of affirmation, a great deal of data to support where we were going. And so you're going to have different behaviors in your workforce, and it's important, I believe, that we understand what those behaviors are, because we can't just say that person isn't cooperating, and I don't think that they're good for this team, or I don't think they're a good match for our culture anymore. Maybe we just need to allow them to look at their behavior style and match that up with the change that we're going through, and so that we can get that commitment. Because truly, is there anything better than a well-oiled machine on a team when you're trying to get something done? No, we can see that all day long in various teams, whether it be sports teams, whether it be teams that we worked on in our own organizations. When we get it all together and we're moving forward, it works very well. But it does take that time, effort, and patience to get that done. And that's part of our plan of action. The plan of action of course, answering the basic questions and how will you implement the change? What will your plan of action be? And is it customized to your own culture? We all have our own cultures, fast moving, maybe not, slow moving. I think identifying your culture as it pertains to what I consider the 4 types of behavior styles under the DISC model. Do you have a dominant culture? Do you have a culture that has a tendency to be influential? Do you have a culture that has a tendency to be more of a steady pace? Or do you have a culture that has a tendency to be more analytical? I think identifying your culture and coupling that with the type of change that you're going through is helpful when it comes to creating a plan of implementation that's going to be unique to your own culture. So when it's motivating change and, it's just growing pains, right? What are some growing pains that you have experienced in change in your own organization or in a change perhaps that you're going through? What do maybe coworkers or team members or maybe even yourself, what do you have a tendency to see or observe when it comes to growing pains?
Carol leads the discussion with sharing frustration. Jim says negative talk. Mike adds lack of information, active resistance, and passive resistance, says Mike. Catherine says no action at all.
Great, good stuff. Absolutely. And sometimes, again, we may not identify this as growing pains. Maybe we identify this as resistance or an employee who's disengaged. Where is this coming from? But we definitely see things in the forms that you've just mentioned, along with perhaps organizational binders, just not my job. We start seeing this. And then this becomes the pain of change because we're trying to move forward. A blame culture. We're playing that, it's not my job, it's, that person, some confusion about expectations and, lots of activity, but no results. And I think we can all kind of have experienced this on some level. And so it's good to just, again, understand your culture and realize you'll get through the growing pains, but what are you doing from an organizational development perspective to really take a look at that, which is, again, this is why we have this level of evaluation of the changes that we're going through. And the question is, how exactly do you plan to evaluate change? Because if we've gone through all of this and we've taken the time to identify the level of change, is it a radical change? Is it, we've gone through these growing pains, we've identified, we've gotten consensus, we've addressed the behaviors and the different levels of behavior change. Finally, at some point, we have to say, what's our measurement? What's our measuring stick? What are we really using, to measure this change with? When I started up a call center in Victoria, Texas, and it was a town in South Texas, and there was no call centers that were ever there before, so there was a misconception that the call center that we were actually starting up was going to be the type of call center that called you in the middle of supper time to sell you something. That wasn't it. It was a customer care service center that the client was AT&T. So we really had to get out and about and do some marketing, join the chamber, make sure people, realize that we were, a friendly place, that, we were here for the good, providing good jobs for the community. But we had to really start looking at measures and standards about the changes that we were going through. Obviously, we were starting to ramp up, the call center. What was our performance targets? How quickly did we need to do this? What boundaries did we need to follow? We went from 0 to 300 employees in 90 days. And that doesn't sound like a lot, for larger organizations, but it was a, smaller organization in town of about 50,000 people, which was new, offered 3 shifts. So for our particular group, that was a fairly extensive accomplishment. But we had to begin to evaluate before, we got too far down the road is exactly how are we measuring this so that we can be successful? And what does performance look like for our particular organization as we, looked at our clients and looked at what their boundaries and what their expectations were as well. So how will you measure your progress, and how will you measure the changes that you're making? Because at some point, once you've decided that we have either reached or not reached our target, then it's time to think about what our next step is. There's many ways that you can measure your progress: self-evaluation, group interviews, one-on-one. Surveys sometimes get a little overrated. I know that I've been a part of organizations that, their surveys, they come through your email, and we get so much of that sometimes surveys may not be, quite the number one tool of choice, but really just getting out and talking to employees and asking, what's going on? How would you measure this change? How would you rate this change for yourself? And the reason, once we find out those results, then it's a matter of, making some modifications. And I think these final two, this modifying change is one thing from an organizational development perspective that perhaps, as y'all stated earlier in the session, that we don't finish up the change. We ditch it before we finish it. It's too hard. We don't complete the change. Perhaps we don't just give ourselves the opportunity to modify it. So maybe looking at it from, your culture, can we be more flexible? Can we be more aware? Could we establish more of an openness of communication so that we can truly, instead of giving up on the change, what can we do to evaluate and modify it so we can be more successful? So, and this is just a question for thought. Which aspect of your organizational culture do you need to focus on to ensure change can be modified, if necessary? Again, sometimes I think that we look too hard at people, and this is when I say I think this is because it's a collective conversations with fellow HR professionals and business professionals, and sometimes, and I just had a student that I was mentoring recently, and one of the things that the topics was performance improvement. And the very first thing on performance improvement, when it came to talking to me about how can you change this particular situation to improve performance, and the very first thing she wanted to do was, well, there's this person, and we need to, if that person wasn't there, I think things would be better. And so the very first thing, and this is the first time that I've heard that, well, it's this person. So we want to start looking at things from we want to start blaming people as maybe an interference for change, when in fact, maybe we should look at perhaps the culture or the process. And as she went through the steps for performance improvement and took her eyes off of the person and started looking at processes and procedures and the culture, she started to realize, wow, it really isn't that person. Maybe that person doesn't have the tools that they need. Maybe our culture is looking at things a little bit differently. So I was the recipient of her final presentation actually earlier today, and it was very rewarding to see that she was no longer looking at a focus on a person. She was looking at the processes, the tools, and those were the things that were going to help with the change. And getting the person on board and getting the consensus is what created the success. So some final thoughts before we open up for questions. First of all, on the right-hand side, if you change nothing and nothing changes, right? So we know that we're usually involved in constant change. So one of the most important aspects within the work environment or change is one of the most important aspects within the work environment. And I hope you agree with that. I certainly see that as something that has really come on board as something that's important in our work environments. And then, of course, our organizational culture. This is what provides our platform in which we can, again, going back to one of the first things that we talked about, is what to expect as far as anticipating and expecting change. And how can we do a better job really of doing that, you know, looking at pest factors and anticipating what might be happening within our organization. So at this time, I would like to open the mic, Dr. Theory, and just let's see if there's any comments, questions that we can field at this time.
Fantastic. I'll invite our participants one by one to unmute themselves as they have a question or comment. And then if you elect to otherwise use the chat pod, I'll go ahead and read your question for MeLisa. There's that anticipated awkward pause before the first person jumps in there. And if anyone is having, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, MeLisa.
I was just going to say, if there's no questions, does anybody have any comments? Was there anything in particular about the presentation that struck you as something that might be a tool that would help the change that your organization is going through now? Was there something that stood out to you that maybe you would like to explore further in some of the points that were made in the presentation today?
Nina, I see your comment or your question, and I'll read that. I'll first field Lisa, who says, wonderful presentation. I learned a great amount from the side chatter on topics throughout. MeLisa, I know that you might not be seeing the chat pod and all the conversation that's been taking place. I agree with Lisa that there's been a lot of great conversations. She says, thank you for the session, and asks, will the slides be shared afterwards so we could follow up if desired? So have you address that?
I'm perfectly happy to share the slides, and I was just telling Dr. Theory another thing that I would love to share, and maybe we could put it out there on the LinkedIn site, is if you're interested, I'd like to post the survey link. I use SurveyMonkey, and I would love for you to participate in the surveys and continue the data collection so that the data can be even more robust. So I'd like to do that as well. So I'd like to share both, certainly.
Fantastic. So stay tuned, everyone. We'll likely post the slides then to our website, so you'll find that there. And then, as MeLisa shared, we'll also be encouraging her to post her survey link on our LinkedIn page. And Nina asks, MeLisa, what is the best change project you led, and what made it the best?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that first part.
What is the best change project you led, and what made it the best?
I would have to say, going back to the startup operation after we got everything off the ground, we had to implement an HRIS system from scratch, and I think that was probably the biggest change, because before that we were keeping things on a spreadsheet. And that just wasn't going to work, when you're trying to run it, growing into 600 employees. And so that was probably the biggest change that we had to do. And it was stressful at the time, but I tell you, that is during the era of my career that I really got into the behavior profiles and behavior assessments, because I needed to understand. I couldn't, replace my HR team just because there was frustration, right? So I got into, and that's when I became a certified DISC administrator, because I looked at many, many tools, and this one seemed to be spot on for my use. And I started to look at, the behaviors of the members of my team, and who worked best in what type of environment. And those were then, then I started to assign the various parts of the project out to the folks who were the analysts, the folks who could field the questions from employees. And at the end of the day, what made it successful is the fact that we were the site, our HR team, our IHRS system, the data that we collected was used as a sample for the entire organization. So when it came to posting reports for EEOC and those kind of governmental reports, our site was used as the kind of the flagship and model for that type of reporting. So thank you for asking the question and allowing me to answer that. I hope that answered your question.
I'd like to also second the comment that Samantha just made. It is so easy to blame everyone else for the reason for your company failures. I appreciate the point she says about looking at the culture and policies instead of blaming the person. Thanks, Samantha.
Great observation. Thank you for that.
Dr. Theory, this is Dr. Ziegler. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, Dr. Rogers, I have one thing that I would like to say here. My doctorate was in change management also. And by the way, my wife is an Aggie too. So, I just wanted to mention that you brought up the part about culture. And in my when I was working on my doctorate a long time ago, one of the things I was looking at was building the capacity, organizations building the capacity for change, and not just for major change initiatives, but for on a regular basis, because it was actually a model I was looking at was called the ever-changing organization model. But one thing that they focused a lot on the technical side and building people's, getting people past the idea of their comfort zone and that. But one thing you mentioned that, I don't think was focused on enough then or has been ever since is understanding the true culture of your organization. I think all these models seem to be a one-size-fits-all for any organizational culture and not necessarily for specific types of cultures within an organization. I think that's an area that would be a great area for future research.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that and really identifying, again, from a behavior perspective, the type of culture. So you're exactly right, and thank you for recognizing that, because that again seems to be something that I hear, and I also believe, as you just mentioned, that could be one of the reasons why we just set the change models aside, because it's something that just doesn't seem to fit. But that culture enhancement and understanding that culture, understanding the culture and the behavior of the culture. So thank you for sharing. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Jim. Are there any other comments? And if you're having questions or comments, and if you're having any difficulty with unmuting yourself, I can help you with that as well. Thank you for sharing your comment and your experiences, Lisa. Lisa writes, as someone trained in applied urban and medical anthropology and instructional design and technology, my 2 professional lives so far, I sure do take for granted that not everyone appreciates the influence of the socio-cultural systems and microsystems in which organizations and teams dysfunction or function, right? This is a great reminder that not everyone I work with may appreciate the holism needed in analyzing change plans and strategy. Thank you, Lisa, for your comment. Did I capture that appropriately?
Thank you. That was a great comment. Because when you were reading through that comment, Dr. Theory, threw me right back to those test factors and those areas that come up in those different types of changes. So I appreciate you recognizing that in your organization as well.
And you've received several kudos and comments and remarks of appreciation, MeLisa.
Well, I tell you what, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much. You know, I've joined the LinkedIn chapter, so connect with me. My information and email is available here. Reach out to me. You know, this is an area that I'm very interested, you know, in continuing to pursue, and would love to hear back about your, you know, what your experiences are. Again, I like to just talk about it, converse about it. But I appreciate your time this afternoon, and I appreciate the opportunity to share a few things, and I hope to continue to share in the future.
Thank you for sharing your contact information on the screen. I'm sure everyone is jotting that down, but we know that you have joined our LinkedIn group page for the Ashford University Forbes School of Business and Technology SHRM chapter, so we will be in touch with you there. Certainly great information. Thank you for the Q&A opportunity. As we close out our session, at the beginning of our presentation, I mentioned several individuals that support this chapter, and I missed two special mentions, and those are John Hawk and Janet Horton, former chapter officers and current alum advisors to the chapter. As I shared, there are several individuals that make sessions like this possible. And I think Catherine's comment tops all of the examples today. The fear of the mouse, MeLisa, I'll fill you in on that later. There was a lot of good humor about that. Thanks, Catherine, for that. And I'll close out our session by reminding our audience that as a virtual chapter, we use Zoom just like this to provide educational webinars, but as we've mentioned here, we facilitate a chapter LinkedIn group page. I invite you to continue the conversation there. If you haven't already, you can officially join our chapter by clicking on Join Us at the top of our website. I'll share the URL to our website here now in the chat pod. Requirements for membership include an interest in HR and an affiliation with Ashford University, so ensure your LinkedIn profile shows your affiliation, student, faculty, alum, and so forth. The events tab on our web page links you to previous webinars, and you'll see more uploaded to our chapter's YouTube channel very soon, including this presentation. If you have questions or comments, please use the Contact Us form on our webpage or email us directly at forbesshurmchapter@ashford.edu. And stay tuned for more information about our May webinar with guest presenter Grace Williamson, who's here with us today, our Director of Career Services and Alumni Relations at Ashford University. The topic will be search engine optimization and using keywords effectively. So you'll get some insider info from an expert. Thank you in advance, Grace Williamson, for joining us for future sessions and leading us with your expertise. You all don't want to miss that. We also accept proposals and take special requests for future webinars. So if you have a topic that you'd like to propose, there is a form on our webpage under opportunities for you to pitch your idea. So check that out as well. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and have a fantastic day.